Would you turn with me to Luke chapter 20? So would you turn with me to Luke chapter 20? Luke chapter 21. And let's look at the first... Oh, was it you, Nancy? Was it you first? The same thing happened like a couple weeks ago. That's fine. I appreciate that. Would you turn with me to Luke chapter 21? And I want to read just 4 verses at the beginning of Luke chapter 21. And what you have to understand about these verses is that if you read them by themselves, it sounds like it's talking about one thing. But if you read them with everything that surrounds those verses, you can see that it's talking about something else. Okay? So, Luke chapter 21, starting in verse 1. It says, about Jesus, it says, "And he looked up and saw the rich men casting their gifts into the treasury. And he saw also a certain poor widow casting into their 2 mites. And he said, of a truth, I say unto you that this poor widow has cast in more than they all. For all these have of their abundance cast into the offerings of God, but she of her penury, of her poverty, have cast in all the living that she had." Okay, so where are we going with this? Now, if you've been in church long enough, you would probably think that this is a text about giving, right? That's what it looks like. So the way that we can preach it is, it's not about what you give, but how much you keep behind for yourself. Or another way that we can preach it is giving everything that you have, whether it's your money, your time, your talents, right? We've heard this before. But I'm not sure that that's the way that it's supposed to be preached. I think the meaning here is very, very different. Okay, so I'll take you through the meaning in my message. And just try to follow along. Try to follow along why I land where I do on this text. But before I do that, I want to tell you a story. Okay? And this story, you're going to think it has nothing to do with this text, but it has everything to do with this text. How many people have been watching in the news the story about the pregnant woman in Brooklyn who collapsed at work and then later died, and then there were 2 EMTs that refused to help her? How many people have been watching that story? Okay. Did you happen to take note of where that story took place, of where that woman worked? Okay. Oban Pond, yes. I knew this woman. Okay. She didn't work on my shift. She worked in the same store, but I would come in and then she would finish up her shift later at that time. Her name was Utisha. And so this is becoming, it has the potential to become a really big media story. You know, the New York media loves stories like this. I want to kind of give you the whole picture, as best as I know it, of this young lady's life, where there's just one struggle after another struggle after another struggle, and how everything got compounded for this woman at the end of her life. So, Utisha, who was 25, she had a baby a couple of years ago, and because I think things didn't go well with the baby's father, she was living with her mom, and that gave her the opportunity to do some school. It gave her the opportunity to have a job because her mom would take care of her baby when she went to work. Now that worked out for a while, until Utisha got pregnant with her second baby. She didn't tell her mom, but her mom knew what was up. And so what happened is that her mom started pestering her. She says, no, you're not bringing another baby into my house. I'm not raising your kids. I'm not looking after another child for you. And so that created all kinds of friction for a couple months between her and her mom, until she said, okay, I'm not going to live with you anymore. So she moved out of her mom's, and she moved with her baby's father. But because of the stress and because of complications with her pregnancy, she did not keep great health during that time. So she became ill with bronchitis, and then she had asthma, probably as a result of that. And so she was in work that morning, a couple weeks ago, and I actually found out about it just like an hour or two after it happened, because some of our old co-workers called me and another guy at our new job. So what happened that morning is that she wasn't feeling well, and, pregnant, morning sickness, so she was vomiting some, and, everyone thought, okay, morning sickness, whatever, fine, let's go home for the day. But what happened, medically, here's what they think happened. What they think happened is that as she vomited, some of the acid from, now this is going to sound a little gross, but just stick with me here, because there's a point to all this. As she vomited, some of the acid from her stomach went into her respiratory passages. Because she had asthma, her respiratory passages got extremely irritated, and her lungs started to close up because of that. And as a result of that, she collapsed at work, and later she went into cardiac arrest. That was happening in the back of the restaurant. Employees ran out to the front of the restaurant, and that building, One Metrotech Center in J Street, in the Borough Hall area of Brooklyn, it's right next door to the 911 headquarters. And so there's paramedics and EMTs and dispatchers in and out of the restaurant all day long. And so these couple of employees, they saw two EMTs that they knew. Ivan knew one of these EMTs, and started yelling and screaming at them, saying, you gotta come help, you gotta come help. They're probably yelling and screaming and cursing as well, just because of the hysteria of that situation. And the EMTs, who were on their break, they didn't think that they could help or should help or didn't want to help, whatever it was. They purchased their breakfast and they left. As a result of that, well, maybe not a direct result, but this woman ended up dying. Now it's become a huge thing in the media. Mayor Bloomberg has commented on it. I've probably never seen Mayor Bloomberg that angry as he was at a press conference where they talked about that. And then there's legal issues involved as well. Like, who's responsible for this? Then the mom has to bear that burden as well. So not only does she become sole guardian of a grandchild, she probably didn't expect that at this age, but she has to wrestle through that struggle of saying, the last 3 months of my daughter's life were just a nightmare between me and her. And it led to that broken relationship, which will never be restored. Then you have this child who's 3 years old, doesn't have a mother anymore, and will grow up without a mother. And when we look at this, and we take a bird's eye view of the whole story, and I think, and we're inclined to ask, what went wrong? Whose fault is it? And then, no one wants this to become a media circus, but that's what it's going to become. Because there's city workers involved, and then there's probably lawsuits involved in that, and it becomes a whole media circus. So, who's responsible? Now, there's some of us who would say, well, everyone's responsible for their own choices and their own actions. There's some who would say, well, her mom shouldn't have been so hard on her. Her mom should have been more supportive. There's some who will say, well, it was the EMTs. They should have helped her. They should have done CPR. Some will say, well, the media should just stay out of it. Don't make it a circus. That's not in the best interest of the child. And everyone has an opinion on it. What I want to submit to you is that this story illustrates the world that we live in and all of our hearts. Look at what happened. Some mistakes that she had made got compounded when her mother was aggressive about it. And then she became sick, and so that compounded it even more. And then her having to work compounded it even more. And then the paramedics not helping her when she needed help, that compounded it more. And now the legal issues compounded more. And what the mom and the child have to wrestle with now, it compounds it more. And now the media makes it worse. And so there's all these imperfections, all these issues, all these sins, all these problems that one on top of the other, where they meet, it just explodes into all kinds of trauma, all kinds of pain. And a word that I like to use to describe this is that I call this the brokenness of man. Call it what you want: lostness, sin, selfishness, hurt, pain, trauma. We're going to use the term brokenness here to refer to those things that are in our lives. Our fault or not our fault, society's fault. That's what happens when you put a bunch of imperfect people together in a family, in a society, in a church. There's brokenness that gets compounded. Lostness, selfishness, hurt, and pain are multiplied. And if we are honest, I think we can all say that to some degree or another, our lives can be like this. Not all the time, but our lives resemble this. Our lives have a similarity to this. Some of us just do a better job of hiding it than others. And for some of us, the effects of that are not as dangerous to us. This story, to me, as I've been thinking about it for the past 2 weeks, this story is a reminder of how much we need the cross. How much we need as individuals, as families, as parent to child, as members of society, how much we need the cross of Christ. And so, in this text, now if you're saying, what does this have to do with this text about this widow putting in her 2 coins? You're going to see. Because I want to contrast the cross of Christ with religion. Okay? Religion is man's effort to clean up our acts. Religion puts an enormous amount of pressure on us to look externally clean and good and right. And what I said earlier was that regardless of, you might watch this lady's life play out on TV. I don't know how long it'll go on, a couple weeks, a couple months, who knows. And we'll all have an opinion, but we'll all shake our heads and say, how tragic, why did that happen, how could that happen, who failed, who messed up. But the truth is that to some degree or another, that kind of brokenness exists for all of us. Like I said, some of us do a better job of hiding our brokenness, hiding our problems. Some of us become very religious to hide our problems and our brokenness. And religious puts an enormous amount of pressure on our lives. We see it in a church. In a church, there's extreme pressure for everyone to look like everyone else, for everyone to look like they've got it all together. when the reality is that none of us do. There's brokenness in all of us. That's why I said before we started worshiping that we worship because the cross of Christ enables us to. We wouldn't be able to approach God on the basis of our own goodness, or because it's not there. It's all an illusion. There's levels and levels and layers of brokenness in all of us. So let's be real about that. But the cross of Christ is God's answer to our brokenness, not on the basis of what we do, but on the basis of what Christ accomplished on our behalf. And that's what this text is about, I think. Let me show you why. I want to read this text in context, okay? So let's look 3 verses ahead at the end of chapter 20 of Luke. And then we'll read down through this story, and then we'll pick up the next 2 verses after this story. So I'm just going to read from Luke 20, verse 45, and then just go down and